top broadcasters in the business, Joe Thomas. Let us know if you have any questions, if you want to give him some props, and we will relay it live on air. I'm very excited to connect with Joe Thomas on today's program. A lot to cover, not only from him opening a new radio station or purchasing a radio station, but we have taxes, and Joe and I have very similar mindsets. When I say taxes, you say regressive, and I don't care how you spin it. Taxes impact those on the financial margin the most. I don't care if it's the meals tax, I don't care if it's the personal property tax, I don't care if it's the lodging tax, I don't care if it's the real estate tax rate, real estate assessments. Taxes impact the financial margin the most. J-Dubs, my friend, we are in your hands. Viewers and listeners, give the show a like and a share anywhere you are watching. If you're watching on Twitter, retweet the show. If you're watching on LinkedIn, like the show. We're very excited to welcome Joe Thomas to the program, a show that will start in T-minus 15 seconds. Judah Wickower, we can rock and roll when you're ready. Good Friday afternoon, guys. My name is Jerry Miller, and thank you kindly for joining us on the I Love CVille show. Today's program should be quite dynamic, as Joe Thomas is in the house. We have an award-winning broadcaster of name recognition proportions, and not only is Joe Thomas one of the best in the business, my former boss at one time at Monticello Media. We have a lot to cover with Mr. Thomas. We'll talk about his career. We'll put it in the spotlight, in the perspective. We'll discuss what his plans are as now the owner of a radio station. We'll talk about the split from Monticello Media, a place he called home for about 17 years, a place I know quite well. And we'll take you, the viewer and listener, your questions on today's show. You can shape the discussion on the I Love CVille show, as you always can, Monday through Friday, 12:30 to 1:30. As you know, we're in the shadows of Thomas Jefferson's University, less than 2 miles from the Rotunda, the John Paul Jones Arena and Scott Stadium, a hop, skip, and a jump from the Charlottesville Police Department, and the courthouses of Albemarle in the city of Charlottesville, on Market Street in our building, the Macklin Building. Judah Wickower, if you can go to the studio camera, and then a two-shot, and welcome a man that I think is a household name.
Where?
Joe Thomas, looking sharp in a shirt that is quite artistic, my friend.
Well, I want to thank the folks at Fighting Colors and Gary Velasco. I thought you invited me on here, and I said, well, I'm going to bring the shirt that Gary made himself. An amazing artist, does all kinds of work in really a lost art, nose art. Remember the old bombers of World War II and that kind of thing. He can recreate that. He can make logos for you, restaurants, businesses. You should have one here, Jerry. I mean, you just go. I could see I Love CVille on the nose of a B-52. I'm sorry, I got wistful thinking about the nose of a B-52 with I Love CVille on it. But Gary is a great guy and is suffering through one of the toughest things. I mean, he's going into ALS. And when you're an artist and you lose some of your motor function, he's fighting it hard, and Dawn, his partner. But go to Fighting Colors, find him on Facebook, you see the incredible stuff. He's got art, and he's still doing it. I mean, that's the amazing thing. He's still out there, he's creating and doing stuff. So I just thought I'd fly his colors since you had me on today. So.
Well, I'll tell you what, Joe, I'm very excited that you were able to join us. You and I have a very long history, and I'm going to just offer open-ended questions and perspective.
17 years, Jerry, I've known you.
17 years. I remember. I was a pup at Monticello Media when you came, I think, from, was it Pennsylvania?
I had been running a station in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
And that station was sold off into a ministry, which is certainly noble, but they didn't need staff anymore. They just needed the transmitter. So I went into an 8-month bout of, quote, unemployment, where I worked 3 different jobs, 4 or 5 hours a day each. in Wilmington, Delaware, and Philadelphia, doing news and traffic and answering phones for people and spinning top 40 records. And then finally, Monticello Media hired me to come on down here. And they said, hey, you're in charge of what they call in the business now the spoken word formats. And they said, you're going to run our news talk station and our sports talk station. And I like both. And they said, and you have one employee. His name's Jerry. And I said, okay, what does Jerry do? And they said, he just comes on and rages in the afternoon. And all I could think of is Mad Dog Russo, with perhaps better diction. But, and yeah, you didn't disappoint. You didn't disappoint. So you were quite a part of the Sports Radio 1400 family at the time. So yeah, it was a long time ago.
He has a very good memory. Well, the show is about you, my friend. So talk to us what the community wants to know. What happened? What happened with Monticello Media? What happened with Home?
Well, I mean, and if you follow me on Facebook or if you go to my Facebook page, you'll see, a lot written about what went down, and it's a shame. And I said, at the end of the day, it seems like it's a different perspective on kind of the same thing if you read and you go through. And it really was just where I saw an opportunity and they didn't, and as I said on one of my posts, we'll both just have to agree to have it our way, since for some reason fast food restaurants became a
I
big
know.
part of it.
Burger King, McDonald's enter the mix?
I think somebody there was remembering that I spend a lot of time drawing from my past where I ran a Burger King for some time. So when they made a reference to the Burger King manager, I think they were making sure that anyone who was a regular listener knew they meant me anyway. But we were trying to build kind of a superstation, and I hope to, just make it work, over in the Valley and in Western Albemarle and Nelson, and maybe who knows, find a place where somebody will carry the show in Charlottesville. What do you guys do in the morning here, Jerry?
I'll tell you what, we're open-minded to anything. I mentioned this on yesterday's program, and Judah, can you check Facebook messages there to make sure all the pages are connected there? I mentioned on yesterday's program that the true value opportunity or proposition or the true upside of what you were doing was a joint venture. And what I saw is tremendously valuable for multiple sides of the mountain was you owning this station that was located, from what I can tell and the coverage maps I've seen, outside of the Monticello Media coverage area. You take control of a station where you can localize the content like you always do with your show front and center. Your show stays on WCHV at the same very time, a station that everyone calls home when it comes to talk radio on the dial. And then you could do a joint venture with Monticello Media where you could go to advertisers, car dealers, and say, I want your advertising message on this massive coverage area, and we'll figure out a way to chop up the revenue. It seemed like a no-brainer to me.
Well, and I thought the same thing, and that's the horse race, is not everyone sees the same thing. I mean, there's plenty of people who didn't buy Apple, when Steve Jobs was still working at a garage. So, and I'm not comparing those two things, but I was asked by some of our backers in this venture at the onset, would it work without Monticello Media? And I said, yeah, because I've talked to the businesses in Stanton and Waynesboro and Western Albemarle, and they're hot for it. They like, somebody's going to do our news, not just Harrisonburg news, not just national news. And I said, yeah, we're going to go to, the opening of every envelope is what they say, and promote businesses, but also cover the board of supervisors when they want to hide a bag tax, or I was talking to a mutual friend who's hooking me up with the Waynesboro mayor for my first show, and they're concerned about the bluing of the Valley, and people. The Weldon Cooper Center has a demographic research that they do every year, and in it it says 4,000 people per day drive from Waynesboro, Stanton, Fishersville area into Charlottesville, work at the hospital, work at NGIC, work at the university, and then drive home. And that's, that was that synergy I saw in it. But they said, would it work without? I said, heck yeah, because Stanton and Waynesboro have all the same issues that Albemarle and Fluvanna have, and they just they need to have their voice, and that's what we're putting on as the station that we're calling Your Voice, and it's going to have some local programs. I've had a lot of folks who have done shows in that area in the past reach out to me, folks who do marketing there. So I mean, we're off and running already, and we're still, in stasis, waiting for the Federal Communications Commission to say okay. And then I feel like we're already like the drag racers revving their engines before they pop the clutch. So we're pretty jazzed for getting started, chomping at the bit, I guess.
I'm excited. I think you're going to have, like I said, off air when you walked into the studio, tremendous success. You are a known commodity. Your network is fantastic. You get better guests than anyone. People know Joe Thomas at the General Assembly. They know him in D.C. They know him at the Board of Supervisors. They know him on the dais. They know him for nonprofits with the fantastic support you give nonprofits in this community.
I'm blushing, Jerry.
They know you from Fry Springs till Palmyra to northern Albemarle County, across Central Virginia, and now the Valley. I got a couple more before we talk about what's the plan for your venture here. Do you think there's an opportunity to perhaps, either Mac McDonald called it the band's not breaking up when he was talking about him and you.
Well, he's going to be on Monday's show, so we're stealing your paradigm here a little, Jerry, because we don't have a broadcast signal, so we're going to web stream. As a matter of fact, my first piece of personal tech that I got arrived right before I left for the station.
You get the laptop?
Yeah, the laptop.
Fantastic.
Laptop Mark II has arrived and is booting this time. So what we're going to do is we're going to do a web stream morning show. You'll probably be forced to see me. Sorry. But you get used to it here because it's going to be a little of this. But Mac's already agreed to do sports for us. I'll get some guests as well. But there's been so much going on in this past week that I just feel like we can probably spend a lot of time doing that. I'm going to set up a Skype number so people can call in, and we can just kind of do what we've always done, which is break it down, make it not about them and
well, I see an opportunity to potentially hash it back together. Once I think Monticello Media made a tremendous mistake here. This is me talking about it here. This is my words. I think they made a tremendous mistake. I think there is an opportunity once their cooler heads prevail. They say, okay, finding local content in a market this size with a broadcaster of Joe's talent is going to be difficult to do. Here's the proverbial olive branch. And knowing you, I know you fairly well, you would say, okay, you know what, I'm open-minded to anything as long as it makes sense. The devil's in the details, a phrase you like to use. Why could there be a chance to amend? Get it back together.
There's never a never. I'll tell a story because that's what I do. So one time I had an employee, and he was leaving to go to another place, and that employee called the local TV news station to come to my station to cover his last day. That employee then left. I was not happy with the local TV station or the host, but a couple of years later, he came back with an idea that I thought had merit, and I said, okay, we can.
I think that was me.
Yes, it was.
This
it
was
was.
me.
It was very much you.
This is me. I remember
and
this
Marty
quite well.
Hutloff, and every time I see Marty, I remind him. I say, "You remember that day? I wanted to throw you out." But so you can, so there is never a never. Because boy, I was angry at that point. But you had something you needed to do, and I'm like, all right, well, do what you need to do. And then when you came back and said you wanted to do something, remember McGrady's?
I do.
You used to do a live show from
remotes.
McGrady's every Saturday.
Like 16 years ago. You have a good memory.
Don't ask my wife that because it's like anniversary. So when you came to me with that idea, I'm like, well, this sounds like a good idea. And McGrady's was all in, and it was a great location. You did a great job for that whole time you were doing it.
Yeah.
And I was actually sorry to see that go.
Yeah.
But you left to launch all this. So, but yeah, that's why I'm not the kind of person who says there's never a never. Anyone I've ever worked with will tell you that I have a simple rule: there are no bad ideas. There's bad executions of ideas. because I've seen lawyer shows that get 1 million phone calls and lawyer shows that are about as interesting as listening to paint dry.
Sure.
And it just depends on how you do them. So, I don't know. As far as I'm concerned, I'm just going forward with what we've got.
Let's go forward with what you got.
Yeah. And I've talked to some folks about a Charlottesville station. But I've also talked to folks who, believe it or not, are saying, well, what about here? And what about there? And what about Lexington? What about, Dillwyn? What about every place under the sun? So there's other opportunities there. You want to make sure, though, that you're serving people. I mean, that's at the end of the day what it is. You've got two customer bases in radio, and that's your advertisers and your listeners. And the synergy you really want to do is you have enough listeners so that they go in and visit your sponsors, like Pyramid Paving. See how I did that?
That was very nice.
Not enough O's and smooth for me. So you have enough listeners to say, hey, not everyone's going to need their driveway paved, but somebody is, and they're going to say, oh, Joe said Pyramid Paving. Let me call them. And that's the whole point of it. And so you're trying to serve two entirely different groups of people at the same time. But if you do the first one correctly, the second one takes care of itself. So, that's the business model going forward. And I better be good at it because my wife is actually majority owner.
I was going to highlight Elaine, your wife. Suzanne Coffey, she says, go Joe. On the feed, viewers and listeners, if you want to give Joe Thomas some props or ask him a question, put it in the social media channel or platform or app that you're watching upon, and we'll relay it live on air. Suzanne Coffey, thank you for watching the program. John
and
Blair.
by the way, I would be remiss. So it's going to be 12:40 a.m. in Stanton, WTON. 101.1 FM from the top of Afton Mountain. That's Waynesboro and Crozet and the 151 corridor. And I've had people listening in Scottsville. Right now it's music. And then 98.9 in Harrisonburg. And so that's where you'll be able to find us somewhere in the next 40 days. And that's the thing, is it's the public comment period where the FCC says, tell us what your thoughts are on it. So please send a letter to the FCC and say, go Joe.
I remember, I'll throw this to you. I remember 16 years ago when I left a career in print, radio, and television to launch a business that was rooted in my experience in writing, reporting the news, and connecting with listeners and viewers through the spoken word. I launched a business that was an advertising agency, and Joe, I was 16 years ago terrified. I had a mortgage. I had
a new family.
A lot of risk. I'm curious of the perspective and the mindset for you as you get into not just being probably the best radio broadcaster I personally know. I sincerely
then you need to get out more, son.
I said I sincerely mean that, and he is, guys, award-winning. He's fantastic, as you know. But this is as much about utilizing God-given talent, which you certainly have, to now business acumen. Talk to us about that and that shift. And is there any fear at all?
Oh, well, you wouldn't be human if there wasn't fear, and it wouldn't work if you weren't afraid of failing, because that's what drives you to keep running fast. But I've got a lot of folks who are joining in. It's like Chaucer's Canterbury Tales. As you go down the road, more and more people kind of join into the band. Folks who have worked in the market. I mentioned several folks have reached out to me who've done radio shows, but there's also folks who know everyone and had been in the world of advertising, marketing, and partnering, and hopefully they'll like coming back to the station. I mean, this station is neat, Jerry. I was in the diligence of it. WCHV just celebrated its 90th anniversary, and I only would have known that if it wasn't for Tim Hulbert and the 100th anniversary of the Charlottesville Regional Chamber of Commerce. But going through some of the diligence on this radio station, I found its very original first application for a license from the whatever it was called at the time, the Federal Broadcasting Association or whatever, what is now the FCC. And it's 1942, and the address for the radio station is exactly the same as it is now. Wow. It's in the same building, the same corner of Beverly Street and Stanton. I mean, that's kind of neat to think. I mean, there were artifacts in there of a speaker that used to hang outside the storefront so people could go by and listen to, I can only imagine, maybe it was the rock and roll, it was Jerry Lee Lewis and all the stuff that was going to ruin, society and protests about whatever it may have been. But it's just neat to see this. But there are so many people coming back saying, yeah, we're into it. And it reminds me a lot of what we faced here when we took over where I was. Monticello Media had purchased the stations from iHeartMedia.
I can offer some perspective.
Not iHeart Seville, but iHeart Media.
I can offer some perspective on that because I worked at Monticello Media prior to your arrival. It was initially owned by Clear Channel Communications,
which is now iHeart Media.
Yeah, and Clear Channel Communications was in shambles. Mm-hmm. Absolute shambles. Mm-hmm. George Reed and Monticello Media jump in the game. And they promised a local, boots on the ground type of operation, which they've done. I got to compliment Monticello Media does a lot of things well. They have created a media conglomerate that is radio based, but is very localized. And that's a testament to them because it's an industry that is becoming quickly nationalized with major players scooping up as many frequencies as possible.
See, I'm going to push back on you on
please,
that. I'm going to push because I think our story is the avant-garde.
Because yours definitely is.
Because more and more people, more and more of these stations, you see these chains are all in receivership. iHeartMedia, Cumulus, Odyssey. George Soros just bought 51% of Odyssey, which was, for example, WRVA in Richmond, because they're having big problems. Because I got a little look at this as we were developing this because somebody looked at my business model and said, I can make more profit than that in T-bills. And a light went off in my head, and I said, that's what's doing in local radio is we had a plan that very quickly can make profit, but the financial world doesn't want 2%, 4%. They want 10, 15, 20%. So when you're dealing with publicly traded companies, it's going to be very hard to do local radio because it's always going to be about a budget cut. It's always going to be about got to get something to pump up the bottom line so that when 4:30 comes, we're looking good. And more people than not, and I'm going to be on a panel in June at Talkers Magazine is the industry standard for spoken word, and their publisher, when I told him I was thinking of doing this, a wonderful fellow named Michael Harrison said to me, why?
I figured that was the question.
But there's lots of folks now over the last 3 or 4 years who are individual private owners of radio stations in Texas and Georgia and places where they're getting them because these big conglomerates are they're in asset disposal mode. They have to either the court has ordered them to, or they just can't control them anymore and they need to let them loose. So I think, and this is aspirational, but I think we're going into a period where companies like Monticello Media and Thomas Media LLC are going to be more and more of the rule than the exception.
You're talking smaller players.
Individual, not publicly financed, not, even the chains are going to be, privately held.
The folks across the street, Saga Communications.
Mm-hmm. Well, they're publicly traded.
They are.
But most of their shares were in the Ed Christian family.
Right, and that's where I'm going to go with.
May he rest in peace.
A lot of people don't realize the Charlottesville Radio Group is owned by Saga Communications.
Yep.
Okay, a lot of people don't know that this is not truly a locally owned radio group.
But a lot has changed, as their ownership and bless his heart. And I have always said, a guy like Ed Christian, who was the founder of Saga Communications, he started in newsrooms like you were working in and I was working in, Jerry. So you got to love a guy who has come up with the ink under his nail and the paper cuts from the Associated Press Newswire. up to that point. And I think that there's, nothing is a zero-sum game. So there are resources you can get from a chain that you can't get as an individual. But you got to kind of walk that fine line in between so that you have enough local autonomy to have local talent.
Sure.
Where you can still, if you need to, get the resources of, a car dealership to give away a Volvo per se. Not that I'm saying Volvo should be a sponsor of mine, but just saying.
So you're talking, guys. You guys are listening to two media geeks right here. Joe and I make our careers.
I better know media.
in media, and we know the business inside and out. What we're talking about is this dichotomy between national owners, regional owners, and small individual players. And the national owners have economies of scale and the advantage of vertical integration, where one salesperson can go to an advertiser and sell an entire network that might be multiple stations or multiple newspapers, multiple TV stations, whatever the platform is, and say, I can get you all these eyeballs, and it's one rep doing the selling for the entire network and utilizing economies of scale. The advantage that Mr. Thomas has, and his fantastic wife Elaine, who is always at these events, like me and my better half, there is always a better half right alongside you or in front of you or right behind you, basically the Elmer's glue of the operation, if you may. And I mean that with my wife. I know it with his wife. I'll throw this to you here. I think the advantage you have is it's that David and Goliath ability to pivot quickly, to be nimble, to adapt to playing field.
Sun Tzu, yeah.
There you go.
Yeah.
The art of war, okay? What we have done successfully here, which started with media, then went to advertising, then went to real estate ownership, then real estate investing, business brokerage, and venture funding, is we were able to parlay or platform or trampoline from one success to another very quickly, where our competitors had so much red tape and bureaucracy, they could not keep up pace. I think you can do that with what you were doing.
Well, you also have to, and we were talking about the multiple consumers of what we do.
Yeah.
Because you have sponsored, I'm going to have sponsors, like Pyramid Paving. But radio, and I was talking to my son about this.
Taylor?
Taylor.
Okay. He knows media well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Works across the street.
He's a creative director at NBC 29. I've
Yeah.
been on many advertising shoots with him.
And
he was one of my first board ops when I worked for you.
And that was about the only time he ever worked for me. Everyone thinks that my son's in media because of me. And he's like, no, in no way, shape, and form did I have anything. But he said something interesting about your world and the podcast kind of streaming world.
Sure.
That is a lot like radio. And the thing that's important about radio is the one thing you can almost 100% guarantee about a radio listener is that they're sitting by themselves. And that's not because they don't have friends or anything, but you're driving in your car, you're sitting at your desk, you're in the kitchen, maybe there's kids running around, but they're not listening with you. It's an individual pursuit, you and the person on the air. And I think the podcast world is very similar to that, because I've got a phone and I'm going to watch iHeart Seville, or I'm going to, download Tucker Carlson or whatever. It's a one-on-one thing, whereas TV has become sort of this mass, cold, dispassionate medium that the podcast world draws a lot of the same energy that radio does, because it's an individual pursuit. And the successful ones are the ones who get that, who aren't just thinking it's the stage at the Metropolitan Opera House and there's 100,000 people there. I remember there's a famous sports guy. You were a sports guy.
Yeah.
Mike Francesa.
Oh, yeah.
Most successful sports talk host in America. Announced to the world he was retiring to join Norm Patitz. Norm Patitz is a name nobody knows, but he was the founder of what you now know as Westwood One, the biggest TV radio national brand out there. And they were partnering on something called Podcast One, was the name of the enterprise. And Mike Francesa said, if I can't find a way to make podcasting successful, no one can. And he was out of retirement in a year. But that doesn't mean people like you or Joe Rogan or Tucker Carlson can't make podcasts, because I don't think Mike Francesa did it right. You remember, go back to the old, good idea, good execution or not. I think he thought he was just on network radio and he should just kind of do generic stuff rather than picking on individual
Finding a niche,
stuff.
a niche.
Well, but engaging on an individual level.
Yeah.
I mean, when I first started in radio, the guy who was showing me around, he said, imagine that this is a person, and talk to it. I mean, I took it to the degree, I was at a station that broadcasted to older people than I was. So I taped a picture of my mother to the microphone so that I was always thinking,
I love that.
That's who I'm talking to. And if I was talking about something that didn't make any sense to my mother, then it probably wasn't going to make any sense to my listener either. And that's the one-on-one connection that you have to make, that you need to make. And that's where the big corporations lose that. They don't have the ability to go and do a telethon for the Salvation Army, or wash cars, or go to a fireman's fair and raise money for the volunteer firefighters, because it's all about some guy is
Their
voice
problem
tracking.
is the scale.
Right.
The scale works against them.
Right.
You know what we call it in this business here? It's 3 words.
Mm-hmm.
And Judah Wickhauer's our director and producer. He's off camera. I've said these 3 words in his 13 years of working here so many times, he probably calls them profanities, 4-letter words. Localize, humanize, and personalize. Mm-hmm. In our game, if we can localize the content, humanize the content, and personalize the content, we will have connections of the human variety. And if you can get connections of the human variety, you can then position advertisers' call to action messages in front of them, and our human connections will encourage the support of our advertising partners. And you have this gift.
There's a college education for you, son. Because but you're right. You've codified exactly what we're talking about. It's the humanity of it, and that's what I think is coming back.
I think it is coming back. I think people crave this. And you know why I think people particularly crave this, and why I think you're going to be extremely successful? And we'll highlight some of the viewers and listeners watching the program. And folks, you can give Joe some props by putting it on social media. Our software aggregates it. I'll relay it live on air like
And
Alan.
if you're in Stanton or Waynesboro or Crozet, just tune in about 40 days.
Alan Powell says, Joe, you got this.
Hey, Alan, call Pyramid Paving.
Roy, I love this. Roy Bujanowski. I'm sorry, Roy, if I'm messing up that
Roy
last name.
Bouge is what we used to call
Roy
him.
Bouge, he says, fear is a great motivator. Like Dr. Clark closes with sometimes keep doing what you do. Logan Wells Clayla, welcome to the broadcast. Folks in Crozet, folks in Stanton, folks in the Shenandoah Valley, Waynesboro, Harrisonburg, Nelson County, Charlottesville, Albemarle County, Fluvanna, Lake
And we're going to
Monticello,
stream too.
Orange.
We're going to start a web stream for the station. I'm hoping to create a smartphone app like we did here in Charlottesville, so that people can kind of tune in wherever.
Carly Wagner, Catherine Lochner, welcome to the broadcast. I'm going to ask you some more of what the content goals are. And I want to spend, we have, the beautiful thing about what we're doing is we got no commercial breaks. We can go long form, and I love this subject matter. I seriously geek out for this subject matter. I cannot wait to see the content lineup. Knowing you're going to prioritize localized content as much as possible. Obviously, the flagship is going to be Joe Thomas in the morning, and I don't want to assume, so I'm going to ask you that.
Yep.
Is that, are we going to lead with Joe Thomas in the morning?
Yes, sir.
Okay. What does the rest of the morning, the afternoon look like? What are you brainstorming?
Well, I mean, I've talked to some of my folks in the network shows, and I tend to. We just had Brian Kilmeade come through Charlottesville the other day. Lars Larson has come through. I like if you're going to be a national host, put some effort into your affiliates to come by and meet the listeners one-on-one. And that was great of Brian to do it for us and help the Blue Ridge Area Food Bank. There's one for you, Les. But yeah,
Les Sinclair, radio guy,
came in 4,300 meals raised in a couple of hours at First Free Coffee Bar. That one's for you, Steve. That's a freebie.
Steve Harvey,
you owe me one. But the point being, I've been contacted by a couple of folks who used to do talk shows in the Valley. who know the people and that kind of thing, because you got to have that kind of synergy. You've got to have people who already know, because I'm going to come in and everyone's going to say, oh, it's Charlottesville guy, okay, and I'm not going to know all the players. Like I said, the Waynesboro mayor is going to come on our first show and that kind of thing, and that's straightforward. And having been here, yeah, you get to know the Augusta sheriff and that kind of thing. But these are folks who have reached out and said, hey, can I be part of what you're doing? So we're going to sit down and talk with them and come up with a way that they can, and because that's going to be the most powerful. And then there's local things that are going on, whether it's the theater or the Valley Baseball League or high school football. That was a big controversy. So when the people I'm purchasing the station from, my wife is purchasing the station from, originally purchased it back last autumn, they pulled the plug on local high school football right before, I think it was Redlands was playing for the state championship. And I think both the News Leader and the Augusta Free Press put enormous columns out about the death of local radio and how these guys had been doing sports broadcasting and high school football and that together. We're going to go back to doing that.
That's great.
We have folks who did it. We did it here.
I used to do that.
Yeah. And it's very impactful and it's important to kids who might be the star quarterback at their high school and are probably going to get a scholarship somewhere, but you're never going to see them on Sunday. Or if you do, so these can be the big points of their life when they score a big touchdown to beat their rival on the radio, and that's important. So those things are all going to be part of it. Local shows on Saturday and Sunday, church services, all those things. It's not a magic formula, gang. It's pretty straightforward.
I'm going to throw this to you here. Do you think the opportunity for a show with regional content could work well in the Valley?
Yes, and I'll tell you why. And it's not violating what I just said.
Sure.
So when we did a regionally syndicated show for a while called The Afternoon Constitution.
I remember that show.
Yeah, and we were on in Richmond and Roanoke. And we worked very hard to make sure that if we were talking about something that was going on in Roanoke, that we made it relevant to the person driving around Charlottesville or in Richmond. And it lasted a couple of years. But one of the things I learned was that there's a lot of synergy that I didn't expect. I thought at the time that Charlottesville and Richmond would connect because it's just I-64. But more and more businesses I ran into said, well, are you on in Harrisonburg? Are you on in Waynesboro? Because there were more businesses that would be the supporters on over in the Valley connected to Charlottesville than there were Charlottesville connections to Richmond. And that surprised me. And I said, we better go try to get a Harrisonburg affiliate. We failed doing that, but it was an interesting thing. And then as time has gone on, more and more people, like I said, the Weldon Cooper Center research, 4,000 people a day that live and work, and I guess are the subject of the meals taxes that Charlottesville City loves to enact on people, drive in from Waynesboro or Fishersville to work at UVA and pay the meals tax when they go out to lunch. Brown bag. And so there is a regional community. The interstate plays a part in that, but the university does, and the Ground Intelligence Center and the military folks. But then you look at what's going on. I mean, I just had a long conversation without being verbal. I've been very nonverbal this week, Jay. That's why I'm being very.
But you're still getting up early.
I'm getting up early.
Posting great content on social media.
So we posted a story about Hershey's.
I saw that.
Because there's a lot talking about Northrop Grumman coming to the Valley and some of the old factory space. But Hershey's is an amazing company that is opening up and hiring in the Valley to make chocolate. And you say, oh, well, it's a chocolate factory. But this guy really is the American Willy Wonka. He and his wife, once they finally started to have some success, wanted to have kids, and they found out they couldn't. I mean, this is 100 10 years ago, Jerry. So, I mean, the idea of in vitro fertilization wasn't a controversial news story out of, the Alabama coast. This was just not even science yet. So they started a school. They endowed a school with the profits from the chocolate company called the Milton Hershey School. And eventually, after he passed, the school is actually the owner of the chocolate factory. And the profits from the chocolate factory go to make sure inner city kids can get scholarships to go to, I guess it's elementary school through high school at this school in the middle of Pennsylvania, away from Philadelphia, away from Pittsburgh, away from their bad neighborhoods where crime is running rampant and prosecutors aren't putting people in jail, catch and release. And they get away from it.
One of those Commonwealth's attorneys listens to this show regularly, Mr. Jim Hingley. We have a lot of respect for Jim Hingley. I know you may be referencing Joe Plantani on that one right there, who gave you some props.
No, I wasn't picking anyone. I mean, because there are people who will say that Danny Rutherford in Nelson has done this to people, or whatever.
Mr. Rutherford's brother Jesse, a supervisor at Nelson County, listens to our show routinely.
That's right. It was interesting because I kind of knew that Joe Platania listened to the radio show, but in the maelstrom of stuff that went on in social media.
That was my favorite comment.
He opens his post, if you haven't seen it, he says, "I know this is going to get me in trouble, but," and he talked about how he had listened. So, I mean, I'm talking about people from George Allen to Joe Platania, from Donna Price to several different GOP chairs, all expressing that they had listened to the radio show at some point or another. And it's interesting. So what I'm doing right now while we're waiting for this to happen, except for right this moment because I'm here with you, is I've been writing. I actually started writing
an autobiography.
My unauthorized autobiography.
I saw that. You released some chapter titles. I follow your content.
Yeah, and actually several new ones got thrown out by listeners who said, well, why didn't you put this in there? Because Jason Wright, the great author of the Christmas Jars, did that. His last book, Even the Dog Knows, was sort of workshopped in social media. But the thing I was getting in about the Milton Hershey is this is a great story of somebody whose business is going to be a great credit to this area in general, and maybe people from Albemarle will start driving over to the Valley to work for, whether it's Northrop Grumman or Hershey or any of these other businesses, like they used to when the DuPont folks were over there.
I want to first of all, highlight some of the viewers and listeners watching. I got a lot of questions I want to fire his way. Dave Butler has a question about the daily lineup and what it will be. I don't want to answer for Joe, but he's highlighted that it's kind of a work in progress right now.
I've asked a lot of folks, and see, unfortunately, I run home to mama too easily. I'm not really as creative as I pretend I am. So I've asked some folks who are already involved with me. And as smart business people are, they're like, well, we don't know if the Monticello Media or WCHV would be a conflict. So, I mean, there might be a Lars Larson or Brian Kilmeade. There might not, because we might not be able to clear them, given the footprint of the station. So if not, there are great folks, national folks like Joe Pags, folks like that who I know would do the same kind of stuff. Charlie Kirk, those kind of folks who bring a younger energy to the thing. But like I said, I'm curious to hear from people who did and have ideas in the Valley to come along, because there's big gaps. I mean, I'm up against a station that has Sean Hannity on it, so I'm not going to have Sean Hannity on the lineup, that kind of stuff. I can already guarantee that. So who's doing it locally? And
that's going to be, I'll throw this to you. This is me personally. Then we'll highlight what Mr. John Blair.
We can't do, you can't be on, Chair.
No, sorry, no. Not looking to be on. Mr. John Blair, I'll get to your comment here in a matter of moments. He's the city attorney of Stanton. He's watching you right now.
Oh, hey, John.
Neil Williamson watching you right now on the program. But first, this is what I think as someone who makes his professional living monetizing media across many different forms, legacy and new. Mm-hmm. The key to the success, I think, of what you're going to do is the localization of the content.
Sure.
Because the national content is so accessible through so many different avenues, not just radio, podcasting, to name a few. If you can get content that is specific to Stanton and the Valley, you're going to have huge success, because we are quickly becoming, not just the Valley, but Charlottesville as well, a media desert. We have a community in Charlottesville, which is the heart of Central Virginia. Joe knows
Is that like
this.
a food desert?
Joe, it's just like a food desert.
Michelle's going to come and say we have to mandate some media.
Not enough grocery stores, not enough media outlets. Charlottesville's in the heart of a 300,000 person market, as you know, we call Central
Growing.
Virginia. It's sophisticated, it's affluent, it's nuanced, it's educated, yet every day that goes by, we're lacking media opportunities and stuff to read, stuff to listen to, stuff to hear about. I don't think people realize how much Joe and I have to read on a daily basis to do the stuff that we do. We have insatiable appetites for reading. I mean, put in perspective how you're on the phone, you're reading, you're talking to people to fill your airwaves with content.
Well, there's an old TV show before my time, even though I look like I was there when TV was invented. It was called Your Show of Shows, and it starred a guy named Sid Caesar. Sid Caesar is a very funny man, hysterical comic in his own right. But his writing staff included, and I'm sure I'm going to miss some, Mel Brooks, Carl Reiner, Larry Gelbart, the creator of MASH, Woody Allen, and there's a couple of others that I'm missing in there. These were his writers, and they'd sit in a room like this and write jokes for him. How do you not have a funny show? Imogene Coca, other folks. But how do you not have a funny show with all those people writing for it? And I look at the same, and I chide my callers that they're the best writers in media since then. So they'll call in and they'll have something. And I used to tease them that I would charge them a germaneness surcharge. Like if they called in on something other than what I was talking about, I'd be like, hey, hey, they might see something, or they may have been chewing on something, and they have great intellects as well. So you let them write the show to a degree as well.
That's
and you
what
go
we do
from
here.
there.
Yeah, what we call it, we have an I Love Seville Power Rankings.
Oh, I thought Judah said he wrote the show.
I wish Judah wrote the show. That would make my job way easier. We feature a ranking every week of 60 of our most participatory viewers and listeners.
Okay.
And as they shape the show with questions or comments or ideas, they move up and down this power ranking that we have online. I say often on the program, all we want to be is the water cooler of discussion.
Now,
we don't mind if the discussion is crowdsourced.
Sure.
We just want to be the water cooler.
So like the NCAA rankings, will there be a Sweet 16 at the end?
That's a
and
great
then
idea.
we'll have brackets. And,
That's a great idea. Now, how would we determine? You're saying how we determine who makes it on is through participation that week. That's actually a damn good idea, Joe.
I don't know, how does the NCAA do it? I believe I envisioned a dartboard.
Carol Thorpe, who we've dubbed the Queen of Jack Jewett, she's the top 10 in the power poll. Speaking of that power poll, she said Howard Morris wrote for Sid as well.
Okay.
Howard Morris did. Tom Powell, who's in that power poll of the Toy Lift, the founder, says the best is yet to come for Joe Thomas.
Oh, thank you, Tom.
Flint Engelman says, how about the American Maverick show on WTON?
You still doing it, Flint? He was another one of those folks who did local content for us on CHV back in the day, and get on your feet, Flint, and come on over.
Mr. John Blair from Stanton says, works for Stanton. I don't have any expertise to offer Mr. Thomas, but I will say this.
Did you just say he was the county attorney?
He's the city attorney.
City attorney. I was like, no experience, no expertise at all.
He's the city attorney, and I believe, John, correct me if I'm wrong, at one time was the acting city manager.
Okay.
For Stanton, and was the interim city manager here in Charlottesville.
Oh, that's where I recognize
the city
name
attorney
from.
here in the city of Charlottesville.
Right, that's where I remembered the name from.
And when it was musical chairs here, John Blair was a steady vote of guidance or steady guidance, a North Star for Charlottesville. And I say this all the time on this program. I'm a huge John Blair fan if anybody listens to this show. If we're ever fortunate enough to get John Blair to be the city manager in Charlottesville, whoever's on council at the time should drop everything and say, John, you have the job. And that's no shade to Mr. Sam Sanders. I sincerely mean that. He says this, to Mr. Thomas, high school football is 10 times more important to the Valley than Charlottesville. he is making a very good move if he restores high school football coverage to his station.
Is he going to do the games for us? Could he do play-by-play?
John has the talent to do play-by-play. He's also a father of a young man that's going to be a high school football star potentially. I see him on Twitter making catches as a special wide receiver, John's son. Comments are coming in left and right. I will get to them here in a matter of moments. I'm very excited to highlight the business model. Walk us through sales, walk us through promotions, walk us through accounting, payables, receivables, all these key things that are tough for big picture guys like you and me.
Well, with apologies to the folks at the McIntyre School, this isn't rocket science or rocket surgery. That we're going to go out to the businesses. I mean, it's similar to what I did in Chester County. So before I came here, I was running a radio station in the suburbs of Philadelphia, which the problem was KYW, which is the big news station in Philadelphia, covered the area we were broadcasting to. So people who would move out to Downingtown and Westchester and places like that had no reason to change their radio listening. If they listened to KYW in Philadelphia, they were certainly going to listen to it in Downingtown. So we had to go out everywhere and just hang banners in front of everyone saying that there was a local station, and we managed to get a deal with the local newspaper to put a little something in there, and the local TV station to say we were there. Because that's going to be the first thing, is letting people know we're there. Once we start doing that, and I'm hoping that the sponsors as they come on, like Pyramid Paving, will help in that way, because I've got some creative ideas I don't want to give away because nobody's bought into them yet, but ways to create, I hate to sound such a double point score like business world. I should have a whiteboard behind me. But I want to create a synergy where the advertisers also can help be the promotional announcements to the station, so that as they come on board, they also help us reach out to their customers so that their customers say, oh, there's a radio station here. The key is first build a news product, because the number one reason somebody's going to tune into a news station...
It's the content.
Well, no, it's the news.
Okay.
See, in 1980, I guess it was 1980, Ms. Rosenberg at Bayside High School had a smartass in her TV studies class who was just geeked at the fact that I could study television and get a grade for it. And she's first day in class, I remember it vividly. She stands in front of the classroom and says, "Class, what's the most important part of a newscast?" I went, oh. And she, "Yes, Mr. Thomas." And I was sitting right in the front. I was such a nerd. And I said, "The weather forecast." And she got this face. Like she had eaten a rotten lemon. Like it was sour and rotten. And okay. And she acquiesced to the fact that, yes, that was an important and probably the most important part of a newscast. But she wanted to hear about the journalism and the investigative reporting and everything else. But what does the viewer need to know first? Is it going to rain tomorrow?
Well, interesting that you bring this up. When I worked at the newspaper at the Daily Progress, I worked under Jerry Ratcliffe. I said in the promo post to Hootie, he does a show on this network, Tuesdays at 10:15 a.m. I mentioned in the promo post that you were coming on, that you were my boss as well. Hootie was my boss. When I worked at the newspaper, Jerry Ratcliffe, we used to joke in the sports department. We were the redheaded stepchild of the newsroom of the Daily Progress, the sports writers. The commentary, the columnists, or the news editors, the crime guys, the education guys, they always looked down on us. Oh, they're just writing sports. But when the surveys came in,
sure,
which sections do you read the most? Overwhelmingly, the reason people read the Daily Progress or subscribed to the Daily Progress was the sports section. 70% of readers read sports. Number two, you know what number two was?
Opinion.
Obituaries.
Got to check if I'm in there.
People want to know who died.
Dear friend Joyce Mallory always she'd open up, just want to see if I have to go home early. But
obituaries was two.
And for those who are political nerds and the governmental nerds, Byron Whizzer White, one of the few Heisman Trophy winners who also sat on the Supreme Court.
Oh, yeah.
said that he read the sports sections, and this is changing a little bit, to be fair, Jerry.
It's very much changing, yeah.
But
this
he
was
said,
2005, 2006.
But Whizzer White at the time said he read the sports sections because it chronicled people's achievements rather than all the other parts of the newspaper. And maybe that's changing a little bit, but the point I was making is, when I was hired at Monticello Media, Dennis Mockler, the great GM that helped, save these stations that had been left by the side of the road by Clear Channel.
Now running a painting business, I believe,
In
Dennis Mockler.
Charlotte,
yeah.
And a dear friend. He said, well, what would you need to make WCHV successful? And I said, a newsroom, a news team. And he said, well, what do you mean by that? And I said, well, if you think hiring me is going to be all you need to do, you're fooling yourself. Because people will be tuning in to hear the news, especially given that there was another news station in the market. And I remember the first day I stayed at the English Inn, and
I remember this.
I got up to go to my interview, and I got up early, and I said, well, let me see what the other radio station sounds like.
This is 1070?
1070.
Okay.
And I put the radio on, and I don't know if he's tuned in or not, but the first voice I heard after the commercials was John Peterson. And John Peterson came on, and he was doing the local news, and I got the honor. I was talking to him just yesterday because he came over and worked for us at Monticello Media. But I heard him give the local news, and I said to myself out loud, crap, they sound good. I mean, I was hoping against hope that they were like, I was hoping it was good. And he came on and he sounded like a network newscast. I'm like, oh no, this is going to be way harder than I thought it was. But I said, so they hired Melissa Neely, and Marcello Rolando and all these folks who came in, and then we partnered with CBS 19 and guys like Frankie Jupiter and Carter Johnson and all these folks came in and did turns in our afternoons and helped us, without a lot of budget to begin with, create a newsroom. And that's going to be our thing first. It may be me and some local guys and then some network guys. Don't judge harshly if we have some network shows. 24 hours is a long time. Not that listening to you and me, I think Joe could talk for 24 hours.
I think we both could.
But let's viva la difference. But the key is going to be getting a newsroom up and running. Folks, I've already talked to the folks at Blue Ridge Life magazine, Tommy Stafford and his business there, and hopefully, get a news, association with some of the local folks.
This is why you're going to be successful.
But I mean, we've got to be able to say, Gary Grant, my friend from Gary.
He watches the show.
He was such an integral part of the newsrooms of Central Virginia. He's going to advise, and so that's going to be the key. Whatever else we do in between the newscasts, the key is going to be local news from Stanton, from Waynesboro, from Mr. Blair's office. Sorry, John, we may actually cover, some stuff, that happens in Stanton City Council meetings, because that's what people are going to want to hear about. Because you were talking at the onset, at some point, I imagine, I'm just treading water here, folks. He keeps mentioning that he's going to talk about the bag tax and the local taxes.
Oh, we'll talk about that.
I'm like, when? I'm getting tired of myself.
No, I'm geek, and the viewer. I see the viewers and listeners responding. They want to hear this. I mean, this is Joe Thomas.
And my posts on Facebook have been, here's a couple of the stories I'm thinking about.
This is you vulnerable. Because guys like you and I, we love to cover storylines. Guys like you and I, in a lot of ways, we love to talk. We love the byline. We love to see the lower third with our names on there. Don't get me, I know you well enough to know that you told me one time, Joe Thomas loves some Joe Thomas.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when you told me that.
There was one guarantee about radio and media people. We are as shallow as the puddle out there on Market Street.
Right.
I mean, we
One of the things that we're able to do, though, is we are able to, in some ways, not hide behind the story, but utilize the story to insulate us in some ways. Mm-hmm. But what's happening right now with this interview is this is very much about Joe Thomas, the person, Elaine Thomas, and Joe, the business people, and what is the next chapter of their life. And that is vulnerable. And I can tell by your body language. This is vulnerable.
I don't know what you mean, Mr. Congressman. I have no recollection. Well, no, I mean, I don't. There was a point when I wound up in Westchester. I had worked for Clear Channel in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and you can vet me because I pronounced it correctly. So I was in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, spinning top 40, FM 97. We were number one in the marketplace from the youngest age measured all the way to the oldest. And they fired me. And they just called me and said, Joe, you're fired. I said, why? Because you figure that's the metric by which we're judged is, are the most people listening. We feel like your show leans too much on the older demographics, and we want to get a younger audience. They were, I guess, apparently afraid of another station coming on that was going to like super go after the 12-year-olds. And so they said, you talk to the moms too much, Joe. So
Which is crucially important because they control the household budgets.
And the radio in the car, usually.
Right, exactly, exactly.
But so I was left there, and my wife and I sat there, and there were some very bad decisions made then, like, I'm going to say this phrase, and I'm not going to get into details, just for men, bad idea. But aside from the just for men fiasco, I said, well, let's look around, and there was a talk station in Chester County, which is only about an hour away, kind of like Charlottesville and Sinton, but they were looking for a program director, morning host, and I said, I don't know, dear. Let's see if I can be popular without 8 or 9 records every hour. And that's what we did, is we went, and I was like, I don't know what we're going to do, because you're taught in music radio that when the bit, or whatever it is you're doing, reaches its culmination, hit the jingle and get out. Don't belabor the point. I couldn't do that now. I had to get 15 minutes or 10 minutes. I can't.
Before the break.
Yeah, I just had 5 minutes. I don't have any more. And
Yeah.
so you have to learn. You have to kind of get pushed out there, and a lot of awkward silences there in Chester County. And they were actually sad to see the station go when I left there. But you learn that the story can be told by a lot of different people, and I know you're not a theological show, but when you let go and let God, it happens. You say, hey, anyone else have a problem with this? And let the phones light up, because you know, if you're smart and you're tapped in and you're empathetic, there are people, and that's what you have to go with. So I'm not really. I was more nervous about what was going to happen when you quit at Sports Radio 1400 than I am now.
Oh, I like your confidence here.
Well, because we already have an amazing bunch of folks, and starting with Pyramid Paving, but there's already folks on this journey who are like, my nervousness is letting them down. My nervousness is not, can I do this? It's that if I do everything I know I can do, will I still let people down? So that's what I'm afraid of more than anything else, but I'm always afraid of that. I was afraid of letting George Reed down, and Monticello Media, and Mike Sciamento, and PJ Styles. My heart still goes out, because I know what's going on is a lot of folks are working a lot harder than they had to a week ago, and I hate that for them, because that's not what I wanted. And of course, grown-ups in the room will say, "Come on, Joe, you can't always get what you want."
But I mean, I should highlight this. I mean, and the reason I know this is because you posted this. You have significant. You and Elaine have significant skin in the game here. We're talking a $250,000 of skin in the game here, and I'm going to be straightforward here. $250,000.
Some of that isn't all our money, so that's again more of the don't let people down.
I totally understand.
I won't say what my financial backer says the slogan of our little enterprise is, but it is don't something it up.
Yeah, well, I mean you can say it on here. There's no
that's
rules.
right. We're on the air.
I mean, I make the rules here. There's no FCC here. We make literally.
It's DFIU. That is our.
No, I mean, for the moms that are listening or listening to the show with their kids in the car, I say, don't duck it up, quack, quack, quack.
Yeah,
okay.
Sure, yeah.
But that's
don't screw it up.
You got a $250,000 here. You have significant skin in the game here. I'll throw this to you. And be
Plus,
very,
I'm 60, so
I was going to go there. You're 60. You're not. When I started this business 16 years ago, I was 25. Mm-hmm. There was, and one slight correction, I was a single man at the time with a mortgage, didn't have any kids, okay? Yep. So the risk profile was different. And I'll also throw this to you as well. Pointed question, skin in the game in an industry that has some headwinds. Mm-hmm. I think that's fair. Anywhere you want to go on that?
Yeah, I'll debate the headwinds part.
Okay.
Because radio is really the only media that hasn't seen significant erosion in its popularity, in its usage. And I was asked, and like I mentioned, I'm going to Michael Harrison's Talkers Conference, and last year I was part of a panel that was discussing digital. And all the other folks, including Sean Hannity's producer and Jeff Katz from WRVA, they were talking about using digital to go out. And so I flipped the script and I said, well, let me talk to you a little bit about using digital to come in.
To the signal, to radio.
To create content, to use things, Wendell Drumheller at the Automated Office Systems. They have a phone system, that you could set up. So let's say Jerry Miller is doing a weekly show, or we'll make it real. Let's say Butch Duke is doing a weekly show, but he records it in advance.
Yeah.
But we want to do call-ins. And Dave Ramsey does this great. So you call in and it says, hey, thanks for calling the Dave Ramsey Show. If you have a question for Dave, record it out. Rick Edelman used to do that amazingly well. He would actually tell you, just record an MP3 of your question and send it to me, and maybe we'll answer it on the show. So there's ways to get callers even if people aren't live. You can hear, hey, I've got a question about this, especially in an expertise show like home improvement or finance. So there's so much technology that you can use to create radio and create that connection between the listener and the host that wasn't there 17 years ago when I came here. And I think that's why radio, and also to Jeff Katz and all the folks who were talking about the outward side of it. I mean, radio is one of the few mediums that grasps streaming, social media. I remember 1994, Julian Booker of Delmarva Broadcasting came in and said, guys, we have a website for this rock station I was on, 97.1, The Fox, as Don Geronimo used to call it. And we're like, why do we need a website, Pete? And he said, no, this is going to be the thing, and you're going to have each going to have an email account, and listeners can email stuff to you too. I'm like, oh my gosh, just what? But radio is that ability to say, okay, we can use that. For a long time, I was simulcasting my morning show on CBS 19, and they had a smartphone app in an iPhone that I took to Cleveland and Philadelphia with me to cover the political conventions. How many radio but you have to be open to it. You can't sit there and say, no, I come in here and I rip all my newswire off the Associated Press and this is what I do, and I read Rush's book, and I was like, Rush Limbaugh, the grand poobah of what we do in the spoken word.
Was so open to everything.
He would talk about getting iPhone. He had media coming in from everywhere.
Yeah.
So you have to have it coming in and going out, and that's why if you look at the percentages, I mean, we don't have the same amount we did 15 years ago or 10 years ago, but we've lost a lot less
than broadcast television.
Without question.
Than newspapers.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there are, though, I mean, there's starting to be successful news outlets who are grasping it, who are getting the model. But radio still, because like I said at the onset, what you do with the podcast, you're sitting here, you're talking to somebody who's probably sitting by themselves watching this podcast, watching this stream. It's that individual connection that becomes so hard to break. The smartphone app, and again, people say, well, you're going to say Monticello Media was brilliant to say, hey, do you want a smartphone app? When I asked, I said, hey, do you think we can pay a little extra to Premier Radio Network so we can stream Sean Hannity and Rush Limbaugh? And they said, well, why would you do that? I said, because I would like the stream to sound exactly like the on air. And they said, okay. And it wasn't a lot of money, but it was additional money.
Sure.
And the web stream numbers went crazy because you could stream Rush Limbaugh. I had people listening in Chicago, and because they're like, I can't stream Rush anywhere else. But it's that idea that you can be wherever they are. Now that we have smartphone apps and Bluetooth and things like that, it's just a transistor radio. It's just what we've been doing since the 50s. You just have to make sure the content is there. And that's back to what you were saying about the syndicated talk shows, the syndicated music shows. I mean, I have Spotify.
Yeah.
I was listening to Spotify. Sometimes I just feel like listening to Spotify. But I want to hear the DJ in between the records. And there's piles of research that says the most successful music radio shows are the ones where there are personalities in between the records saying, hey, we're going to be here doing this, or hey, don't forget this is going on, because we're still sitting by ourselves, even if we're listening to music. And
You want human connection.
yes,
That's what it is.
When I was a Burger King, when I was transitioning, there's a double point score. When I was transitioning from the now infamous Burger King period of my life to radio, I was working weekends at a radio station. And I didn't want to have to manage a Burger King because that's a lot of thinking and a lot of planning and everything else. So a friend of mine said, well, I'll tell you what, Joe, we will hire you as our night porter. So I would come in at closing time, take apart all the broilers and drain the French fry vats and mop all the floors and clean all the bathrooms. It was easy because it didn't require me to think and plan. I just did. But I brought my little boom box in. And this is 1987. So I had my boombox, and I had cassettes. I had all my cassettes, and I put the first one in, and about 20 minutes into cleaning the dining room area, I was like, I just want to listen to something else. So I put the local rock station on, because, in case you can't tell, that's what I listen to. And I realized then that the most important thing was knowing that there was another human being alive while I was sitting in the shopping center with no one else around. And I used to say this to Marcello. Did you ever meet Marcello?
I don't think so.
He does theater. He's a director. He's still in town. He's still around. But he was working for us because he had worked with Melissa, our news director.
I met Melissa.
Place, yeah.
Yeah.
And Marcello would do the overnight news for me. And he's like, but Joe, and he's very theatrical. He used to work in soap operas. Why am I said, because there's somebody there who's
counting on you.
Because he's on third shift,
Yeah.
or he's doing security or whatever, and he's more alone than the guy who's sitting in traffic on
100%.
Rio Road. He needs to know that there's another human being on the planet alive. And that's so powerful. And as you go back to the lineup, that's why the local news is important, because you need to know somebody else is out there seeing the same stuff you are a little bit. And I'm sorry, you got me
No, that
going.
was fantastic. That was fantastic.
What's the line from? I used to keep this in the studio. I wonder if I can still get it back. Is that line from The Incredibles, where Mr. Incredible and Frozone are in the car, and he's like, Doctor, whatever his name is, has me dead to rights. He's about to kill me, and then he starts monologuing. It is the funniest part of The Incredibles, because every superhero fan knows that at some point Mr. Freeze is going to monologue while Batman's getting out of the ties.
I love
and
your
here I am.
monologues,
I'm
Joe. I love your monologues.
I'm monologuing.
I love it. Well, I mean, and look at this. We're 75 minutes in without taking a break.
Or a breath.
1:45 p.m. And I still want to go a little bit longer here because I want to talk topic matter that's localized to Charlottesville and Central Virginia here.
But who else is? I mean, I'm shallow. Remember, you said I was shallow. Who else is?
You want me to let you know who's giving you some props right now?
Yeah.
I'll relay it live on air.
Please.
Vanessa Parkhill says she's loving what she's hearing right now.
Oh, thanks.
Carolyn Edwards-Lee giving you some props right now. You're getting this comment from Denise V. Stewart. I need to call Pyramid Paving, and I can't wait for the return and the app to launch. Joe Thomas. Thomas Taylor. Joe Thomas is the man. Bellamy Brown sharing the show. Rose LeMaster. Marlene Jones. John Soltz says, please post a link. If you could post a link in the promo post shooter for this show when the show is done, that would be greatly appreciated. You had Jesse Rutherford watching the program. In fact, Supervisor Rutherford's still watching the show. Kevin Yancey, Ray Cadell, Travis
Big Ray.
Hackworth in Southwestern Virginia. The Queen of Keswick, Olivia Branch on the
I
program.
love you, Olivia.
Olivia, how can you not love Olivia? Totally agree with that. Woody Fincham, thank you for watching the program. Neil, still alive. We love Neil Williamson.
Seats
he comes
available,
on your
Neil.
program.
Seats available.
Are available.
Seats available.
And they are. Neil's fantastic at what he does. So
anyway, all right.
that right there feeds the ego a little bit.
Yeah, that's
you gotta feed the ego.
Charged up.
The man wakes up at 3 a.m. Is it 3?
I've slept until 4:30 the last couple of days.
Yeah, but generally when you're on air, is it 3 on Monday?
2:30.
2:30.
Yeah, we were doing that. Yeah.
2:30. All right, I want to talk some storylines here. So you and I are similar in ideologies, I believe, are right in the same neighborhood. Let me ask you this. I get this question asked of me a lot. They say, Jerry, you're a conservative, you're a Republican. And you know how I respond? I said, no, I'm of the party of common sense.
Which one is that?
The party of common, and I don't think it's either of them. You know, I am center of the aisle on so much stuff. I have the common sense to realize that if City Council in Charlottesville chooses to raise the meals tax, the lodging tax, the real estate tax rate, personal property taxes,
the business real estate property tax rate, storefronts,
trust me, I know.
Except for the one that they bought for the Charlottesville Housing and Redevelopment Authority.
Exactly. All at the same time that our real estate assessments have spiked through the roof. At the same time, our credit card interest rates are through the roof because the Fed's keeping rates high. Mm-hmm. At the same time, groceries are out of control. At the same time, gas is out of control.
And let's not forget, and I hear this a lot in the commentariat, they say, groceries are 40% more expensive. I said, no, we're buying 40% less groceries.
Bingo.
Because most of us haven't seen a raise, so we're living on 40% less.
At the same time, wages aren't keeping up with cost of living. No. The concept of raising taxes in this city we call Charlottesville that's less than 50,000 people and having the narrative from those on the dais almost shoved down our throat that this is not a regressive tactic. This incremental tax revenue, a budget that is now ballooned to over $250 million a year.
Yep.
The mindset of these counselors to say, we're doing this to help the people in need in the city is so ass backwards.
Well, at some point, and actually one of the chapters in my unauthorized autobiography is, of course I'll trust you in the Great Society.
Yeah, I know.
Because it's one of those things that they tell you at 10 o'clock over that second martini. But the 60 years since Lyndon Johnson said we were going to be a society of abundance and liberty instead of freedom and prosperity. I added the last bit. What have we achieved for it? Where have we gotten? We actually have as a percentage of population 4 times as many people living below the poverty level. I think it's time to stop and rethink this plan, because what you've created, and I'm going to take the other angle on this, what you've created is a wealth generating class that works harder and harder at ways to keep it from being part of the community.
Distributed.
When Henry Ford started making cars, a lot of people benefited from that because they were working for this job that paid them enough to actually buy one of these cars. We've created a society where we'll offshore the manufacturing of something because it saves us some money, and then the government says, well, we have to tax the people who are left trying to buy the stuff anyway so that we can send you more money. Dave Norris, who I know
comes on the show all the time.
Last time, I was actually in a social setting was Jerry Miller and Dave Norris and Elliot Harding.
Okay.
It was the 4 of us.
Oh, this was at Three Notch, right?
Yeah. Jerry Miller,
You have
Joe
a
Thomas,
fantastic memory, Joe.
Dave Norris, Jerry Miller, and Joe Thomas walk into a bar. But I
Is it
remember,
better than walking into a bar instead of walking into a church?
yeah, well, it's whatever.
Okay.
You tell it's
Depends on the perspective.
what is this? The Catskills? They all know the punchline better than I do. But Dave used to come on the show, and ironically, I was thinking about this because when Monday came, it was April 1st. And there was no Joe Thomas in the morning show. And a lot of people said, what is this, an April Fool's Day gag? And the very last time I actually engaged in an April Fool's Day gag on the air, I said I was quitting to join Dave Norris in a political campaign. Dave and I were going to run for city council under the banner, "We'll work for jobs." Because Dave used to come on the show and say, we are killing ourselves. This is 2010, Jerry. This is not, yesterday. Even then, Dave could see the trajectory of the city creating more and more people that needed more and more subsidy to pay the electric bill, and you're getting fewer and fewer people paying into the kitty that you were using to pay those subsidies. And we continue to trundle along, and it's not because nobody cares. It's that silly binary argument that if you point out that some climate change policy isn't going to actually clean up the climate, you're like, oh, well, you're just for polluters. No, it's not that. I've said this in the past. The one thing conservatives need to pay attention to is poverty more. Because if we truly believe in free market capitalism, look at what they've done in El Salvador and Argentina with free markets opening up and people going to work. My wife was watching James May's Our Man in India, and he's in Mumbai. It's just right out of the set of Slumdog Millionaire. But there's people who are making leather jackets and living, making tons of money making these things in these shacks because there's always an entrepreneurial spirit. Unleash that in Charlottesville. Encourage that in Charlottesville. Let it happen. Years ago, Tom Perriello was our congressman, and he came on the show because we do a weekly spot with our congressman, and Tom, to his credit, was the beginning of that. Tom Perriello came on, and he was telling the listeners about this subsidy program he was coming in to create batteries for this new era of vehicles. See if any of this is sounding predictive. But there was half the grant was going to go to the University of Virginia to research new battery technology, and the other half was going to go to Lynchburg to make the new battery technology. And I said to him, Jerry, can't we make the batteries here in Charlottesville if we're going to innovate? He goes, well, there really wasn't any enthusiasm for that part.
I know.
That's the thing. Especially in a world where manufacturing isn't smokestacks anymore. It's
right?
3D printing. It's high tech. It's computers. You get up late. I know you sleep in. But habitual users of the show have heard me say that the three biggest factories that are laying fallow, well, one isn't fallow anymore, and one is partially used. But the three biggest job-killing factory jobs in this area that left, ConAgra Foods in Crozet, Ix, and the other textile manufacturing in Charlottesville, and Hosung Tires in Scottsville. And I said, okay, so if somebody was making horseshoes, I could say, all right, well, the industry changed and everything. But we still wear sweatshirts, feed our animals, and use tires. Why are we not still making these things here? What have we done to drive all of these jobs away? People keep talking to me about what's going to happen in downtown Scottsville. Well, it's not going to happen until people are working there again. And that's why you were talking about local.
I'll piggyback on that.
Right. It's the Hershey factory. It's the Northrop Grumman coming back to Waynesboro, because they went through that when the DuPont flooring left.
$250 million new facility from Northrop Grumman and Waynesboro. I'll piggyback on what you just said. He highlights ConAgra and Crozet, Ix Textiles, right I mean, half a mile from where we're sitting right now in the tire plant in Scottsville. The fourth industry that is about to be jettisoned from this market, if we're not careful, is food and beverage and the tens of thousands they employ. If we continue to make the meals tax rate so entirely expensive, we're now about to be over 12% of our bill when we go out to dining. We are going to eradicate, absolutely destroy, vaporize all the people and the jobs that work in this industry. And the folks that work in this industry are folks that are often on the financial margin.
Yeah,
and
absolutely.
If council and local government says we're raising the taxes to help those in need, that's not the case. They're raising the taxes and hurting those that are in need because they're taking jobs away from the community. What if you own a restaurant or a food and beverage business are you going to do if you don't have enough customers coming in? First thing you're going to do is figure out a way to trim fat off the payroll. And how you're going to trim fat off the payroll is automation, window service, a pickup window, okay? Eliminating front of the house staff, or doing more with less.
Yeah, you have to, because my friend Caleb Taylor from the Virginia Institute for Public Policy just posted a meme, I guess, or a graphic that pointed this out. He said that, all these philosophers about economics are wrong. It's not about the cost of the labor that drives the cost of the product. The price of a product is driven by what somebody is willing to pay for it. And so you can say, aspirationally, would it be great that every, here it comes again, Burger King employee made $25 an hour? But are you willing to pay $10 for a Whopper? And that's where the
more
problem
than that
is.
now.
Well, but I'm saying, that's what's happening. Is then people are like, well, I'm not doing that. And then you go to a sit-down restaurant and it's $25 for a hamburger if you're lucky, and so not to play heartstrings, but this was probably the most drastically hammered industry during COVID. Regardless of your position on lockdowns, the food and beverage industry, hotels and everything else, they were devastated and still are. And then you're saying, well, we're going to hit you harder.
Not only food and beverage, Main Street. And anyone who watches this program, Ray Cadell says, 2 guys I listen to a lot. Good to hear you guys together. You guys sound absolutely fantastic.
We need a trumpet player, Ray. I mean, there's too many awkward pauses. We need, Doc Severinsen.
The government-forced lockdown, a travesty that ravaged Main Street and small businesses owned by us, our neighbors, the folks that we call friends and family.
And then to come back with taxes on top of it.
There it is.
Yeah.
There it is. To come back on taxes on top is the quintessential proverbial death by 1,000 cuts. And if we don't look, if we're not careful, in Charlesville or Albemarle County, we're going to become, and perhaps we're already there, a community of haves that has very few amenities. And the amenities I'm highlighting here are the coffee shops, the restaurants, the small businesses that have made the region so fantastic to live on, that have put us on these rankings of the best quality of life, the best places to live in the area. It's because of the restaurants, the music venues, the things to do outside. And if we don't have the service personnel to keep these businesses alive, what are we left with? Just a bunch of rich folk living here.
Well, but there's more than that. See, previous life, I lived in State College, Pennsylvania, which, if you've never been there, is very much like Charlottesville. It's in the middle of a state, very big state, not a lot around it, and a big university.
Vanessa Parkhill would like to hear this story. She's a Penn State graduate.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Well, then Vanessa knows about
a fan of yours, she is.
Technology Row, which is, and I don't know who's there now, but when we left State College, it was Murata, Raytheon, a whole bunch of high-tech companies had set up offices in Center County, Pennsylvania, just off of Penn State's campus. But what they did was they hired these young, enthusiastic, bright-eyed college engineering students to come work for them. They were getting them relatively inexpensively because they were right out of school. But the county benefited because now they needed to buy a house or rent a house and buy a car and engage in community. So they were living there, they were staying there. The point was that they invested as a community in the idea of keeping these smart people when they graduated from leaving. And it seems like 17 years now, tell me if I haven't seen this pattern. We pat them on the behind after final exercises and tell them, we'll see you when you're 60. Well, no, we'll see you when you're 62 and you're ready to retire.
Exactly.
And why aren't we, it goes back to that Tom Perriello story. Why, sure, let's come up with the technology to make batteries better and make them here.
25 years for me in this community, went to UVA. So many of my fraternity brothers and classmates at UVA literally looked at me and said, what the hell are you doing staying in Charlottesville? What the hell are you doing staying in Charlottesville?
There's no way.
And now those same people that said, what the hell are you doing in Charlottesville, are figuring out ways to move to Charlottesville because the places they went to, they don't have the quality of life of Seville.
Right. Yep.
And it boggles my mind here, but it's why we live here, because the quality of life is amazing and the people are amazing.
But there needs to be blue-collar jobs, and that's what you're seeing happening. Again, not to flog the WTON, coming soon to 1240 AM, 101.1 FM, and 98.9 FM in Harrisonburg. But you see that area, which has colleges, Mary Washington, I mean, it's got colleges, but it said we need to have
jobs
work
across all socioeconomic price status points.
Exactly.
Wage points.
Give the man a Cupid doll.
Yeah. It says, my boy here, Joe Thomas, is spreading the gospel right here. We'll close on this. We're 92 minutes straight without a commercial break, and the viewers and listeners are loving what they're hearing right now. If you love Joe Thomas, guys, support him. Beth Marcus watching the program right now. Larry Betha, welcome to the show. Thank you kindly for watching. TV station watching us right now on the show. If you want to give Joe some props, put it in the feed. I'll relay it live on air. Mr. Rutherford still on the feed right now. Thank you kindly for we love Jesse. Jesse, I got to get you on the program.
Jesse, our mutual friend Haywood hasn't called me in a while because I'm not on the air anymore.
I'll throw this to you here, and I highlight this a lot on the show. Amazon is going to invest $11 billion in Louisa. $11 billion. One of my friends that's a supervisor over in Louisa said, you can expect somewhere between 800 to 1,200 direct or indirect jobs tied to this. The data science school, funded by friend of the program, Jaffrey Woodruff, $180 million data science school, is going to create a few thousand direct or indirect jobs. The University of Virginia has already said on the record that Paul Manning's $100 million donation to the biotech school on Fontaine, your old stomping grounds, is going to create 4,000, 5,000, 6,000 direct and indirect jobs. Northrop Grumman's investing a couple $100 million into Waynesboro. The average salary of the folks working over there is $94,000. They're probably going to be living in Western Almoro somewhere and commuting there with that kind of average salary for one person of $94,000.
Or Fishersville.
Or Fishersville.
Read Neil Williamson has a great column. Neil, I'm going to forget the name, so I'm not going to try, but it was only just a couple of weeks ago. Neil has all this broken down.
He's watching.
How Albemarle County has to get its head out of its arse when it comes to housing and the allowances and the cost, the $100,000, he was telling me, $100,000 before a shovel even goes into a ground to build a house.
Is Leslie Nelson the answer to Albemarle's false dilemma and housing storage? I think is the column, the name to that column. Perhaps.
Oh, yeah, maybe.
On the Free Enterprise Forum. My point is this, viewers and listeners. In Charlottesville and Albemarle and in Central Virginia, you're looking at somewhere back of the napkin between 6,000 and 10,000 new jobs, high-paying jobs, coming to Charlottesville and Albemarle, maybe some of the other counties.
And let me interject, because a lot of people are like, we can't afford with more people in here. That doesn't necessarily mean 10,000 people are moving to Charlottesville. Why can't 10,000 people who are struggling to get along through Ridge Schuyler's Network to Work program get into those jobs from Hardy Drive, to get away from the shootings, to get away from the crime? Those are the people who should be right now tapping into the Network to Work program so that they're ready for those jobs when they come about.
Or how about I flip the script on you then? Should government who pretends or who peacocks, if you may, we're here to support the little guy, should government be insisting that these incremental job sources figure out ways to hire within the community? Right now, government is saying this, we want to help the little guy, we're going to tax the people. What's happening instead is these additional taxes just creating gentrification, causing the character and the community of Charlottesville and Albemarle to change altogether. Why don't we incentivize a way to hire within the community from government?
Well,
that's how you help.
Neil and I have talked about this a while. I mean, it really is, you have to have the workforce ready. I mean, we used to talk about pad-ready jobs, but also there has to be workforce-ready jobs. So if you know Northrop Grumman's getting ready to hire, sit down with John Northrop or Karen Grumman. I'm kidding. I don't know if there are anyone, but sit down with their director and say, okay, what do you need and how can we help? And sit down with KTEC and the Network to Work program at Piedmont Virginia Community College and sit down and say, let's create the training programs so that the high school kids that are in Albemarle or Monticello or Louisa are ready to go for these jobs. I mean, because they're there. I remember when Amazon was thinking about a headquarters, and my old hometown of Queens, New York, their congressional representative said, we don't want those kind of jobs here. And I'm thinking...
You're scratching your head saying, why is this person talking right now?
Right.
That's what you're saying, right?
Yeah. And who voted for her?
Who voted for this? So Logan Wells Claylow, great show, gentlemen. She's absolutely enjoying it right now.
Hey.
People are giving props to Pyramid Paving on the show. It shows you how good Joe Thomas is at his job right here.
Wait till I have a broadcast signal under me.
I know. Right? My point is the 6,000 to 10,000 jobs, incremental jobs that are going to be created. Dave Norris watching the program. The 6,000 to 10,000 jobs, we love Dave Norris, are going to be six-figure, high-dollar jobs with folks moving to the area as opposed to folks being hired from within the area, which is going to further gentrify the area, which is further going to raise the cost of living in the area. A lot of people don't...
See, I don't say that has to be. I mean, yeah, has that been the experience? Sure, that has been the experience with a lot of these.
The data science and the biotech in particular are going to be outside hires. They've pretty much gone on the record and saying that. Northrop Grumman, these $94,000 on average jobs with this headquarter in Waynesboro, you're going to need some security clearance for that. I mean, it's not like these folks are going to be able to go to like the PVCC.
But that's the defeatism that eats us sometimes, is we look around and say, well, this person's not going to be able to qualify. You see, and that's the weird thing. That's how I get Dave Norris and Joe Platania listening to my radio show. And Robert Tracy. Politically, you would think they're different. But the point is, our innate humanity. We all have the gifts, and a lot of folks, Joe Varaxa, I know he's been on the program, the chaplain at Good News Jail and Prison Ministry. He gets in, rolls up his sleeves, and sits down with guys who haven't just failed in high school, but now are in jail and are facing long terms in jail. And how are you going to pull your plane out of that nosedive? And so to just say they're going to have to hire people from outside, I don't believe that. I don't believe that for a second. I think Ridge Schuyler could get people into the training. He's got the Moving Lives Forward, Liza Borges, the folks at Carter Myers Automotive who have been helping partner with him, United Way, the Envision program at United Way. These are all people who should be right now saying, okay, guys, we got all these people moving here with jobs. Let's get going, and getting into Charlottesville High School and getting into KTEC and PVCC and saying, come on, this is life-changing stuff. Let's get online now for it, rather than sitting there saying, gee, I'm wondering, and I'm not saying United Way is doing this, but instead of waiting for the elected officials to say, well, maybe 5 more cents on the bag tax will help. And I like, Brian Pinkston's been on the show with me. I guess, this week at the city council, he came as close as we've had since David Slutsky to belittling the tax increase. The way Dave Slutsky did with it's just a pizza and a beer. When it's 10 cents to somebody who only has $10, it's a killer.
It's a killer. It's a killer. I don't understand how this is not common sense here. When we have, and I hold the counselors accountable here, the former Mayor Lloyd Snook, his office is 15 feet from where this studio is located. I see Lloyd Snook every day. I call him a friend. Vice Mayor Pinkston comes on the show. Mm-hmm. Mayor Wade's come on our show here. Natalie Ostrin, I have yet to have a conversation with. Michael Payne comes on the program. Natalie Ostrin, I find incredibly befuddling. The counselor in Charlottesville. Here's why I find her befuddling, and I'll throw it to you. Okay?
Okay.
She is against what we call, what she calls car culture. She calls it car culture, okay? She has this phrase, let's call it, she calls it road diet. The road diet, it's let's narrow the roads to create safety on the roads. If they're more narrow, people will be more cautious because they don't feel like they have the shoulder room to drive fast. She says this the other day on the dais. I want to not tax, I don't want to prioritize the meals tax so much because it's going to hurt folks that are on the financial margin. However, I still want to raise the budget. Let's put the tax on the personal property. And let's take the personal property from $4.20 per hundred to $6, a $1.80 raise. And then I'm sitting here thinking this. This is Natalie Ostrin, who works at Pippin Hill in North Garden in Albemarle County. You drive the furthest of anyone on council. You live in the city, you drive the furthest of anyone on council, 20 minutes to your job, 20 minutes back home, maybe 25. You are selling $250,000 weddings for people that are driving to the venue where you're commissioned on. And the entire concept of Pippin Hill is selling glasses and bottles of wine to people that drive to Pippin Hill, and here you're poo-pooing car culture. It is hypocrisy at its finest. It pisses me off. Can you tell? I'm a little. It pisses me off.
Jerry, you really need to come out of your shell.
Pisses me off.
I had a phrase, and I will again on the radio show, which was multifaceted. I would call people multifaceted because after a while I realized two-faced isn't sufficient. It's more than that.
Multifaceted is kinder.
It sounds kinder until I'm saying, well, no, you have more than just two faces.
Until you follow it up with that.
Follow it up. But there is a long culture, and we talked about the Great Society 60 years ago. Also, 60 years ago, a fellow gave a speech in which he said that if you took all the money that the federal government had set aside for poverty programs and divided it up by the number of people living in poverty and just sent them that money, that along with their salaries that they were earning would lift them out of poverty. And I did, as he suggested, the arithmetic just last year, and the math still works out. So what you're actually doing with all these taxes is a bureaucrat employment program. And whether you call it the swamp or the permanent government or the industrial complex or whatever you want, whatever the name is for it, there are a lot of people whose job it is to tell you whether or not you qualify for something or not. And we were just about the whole thing with the who's going to get these jobs. That's where all this money is going. And I'm not saying they're bad people. There are earnest people who want to help people and they go to work in some poverty program. But what they don't realize is their program is actually creating the poverty. And when you realize that, maybe then we can have that awakening of, you may be good-hearted and you're working at the Charlottesville Housing and Redevelopment Authority because you want people to have good housing, and you go home frustrated at night because you just don't seem to be getting there. But it's because the process has never worked.
Like when the Charlottesville Redevelopment and Housing Authority chooses to buy a $2.8 million building on the downtown mall.
And then spend $1 million renovating.
And then spend $1 million renovating it, spending $3.8 million in totality, as opposed to taking that $3.8 million and actually building housing for people. Or when the University of Virginia chooses to spend $25 million a year in diversity, equity, and inclusion salaries for administrators, as opposed to taking $25 million
and endowing scholarships for
and creating scholarships at the tune of $25 million divided by 50,000, 500 yearly scholarships for people that are of different skin color than Joe and I.
Yep.
Explain it to me, Joe. Make it make sense. Make it make sense.
It's style over substance. It's
the dog and pony show.
Right. Well, it's signing that big, to go back to your sports world. It's signing the big free agent who, is 5 years past his prime, but just to sell some more tickets on opening day. It's
Judah likes to call it virtue signaling.
Oh, it's absolutely virtue signaling.
A quintessential example of virtue signaling is when a vote happens on the dais for a ceasefire in Gaza.
Well, that really changed things. I understand Benjamin Netanyahu said, "Oh crap,
we talked about
Charlottesville's against us
you and
now."
I'm having a lot of fun with Joe Thomas here. I sincerely mean this. I love talking with this guy. 3-2 the vote in round one goes against a ceasefire resolution in Gaza. Snook, Payne, and Wade show common sense saying, we make $18,000 a year in Charlottesville. We're in Charlottesville. What does a resolution from Charlottesville have to do with the Middle East? And then 200 people in the auditorium in front of the dais vocalize, strategize, and organize. They schoolyard bully 5 people on a dais, basically like the big 7th grader in the playground by the slides and the monkey bars, saying, give me your Welch's fruit snacks or I'll beat you up. That's what these 200 people in the dais said in the auditorium.
Yeah.
And then guess what happens? Snook, who's a friend of the program, abstains. Pinkston changes his vote. And now we have Charlottesville, Virginia saying, what we're doing here is going to keep warfare from happening in Gaza.
Jerry, just understand that at least they didn't make Rafah a sister city. I'm sorry, was that? I thought that they said the show was over. Hold it. Make
it make sense, Joe.
But it is. Judah's right. It's virtue signaling. It is relevant to nothing, and it does nothing to help the kid that's maybe going to get caught in the crossfire while Chief Kachis is trying to chase down some drug gang who's settling their beefs on the streets of Charlottesville with illegal firearms. And so, yeah, it's a thing, and people are upset. It breaks my heart to watch the Jewish community come out and say, yeah, we need to help believe me, and take 2 hours and watch Chaplin if you want to just have a feeling of what's going on here, because you will see that it happened in World War II or just before World War II as well.
Our Jewish community doesn't feel safe walking around grounds. Razorblade Bert Ellis in a Board of Visitors meeting tries to speak on the record to Rector Robert Hardy with Jim Ryan sitting right next to him in an early March meeting of the Board of Visitors and says, I want to talk about the safety of Jewish students on grounds. Robert Hardy says that's a closed meeting session. We're not going to have it when the cameras are on or the microphone's on.
So obvious.
Razorblade Ellis says, literally, a businessman from Atlanta, we nickname him Razorblade Ellis because he drove across state lines with a razor blade to chop off a sign from the lawn, the front door, that he did not like. Mr. Ellis has the cojones to say, no, Rector Hardy, I want to talk about the safety of Jewish students right now. Hardy says, I'm going to reprimand you, wags the finger at him, and Mr. Hardy wins.
But there's also lawsuits about the university and its behavior towards the Jewish community undergoing, which probably is why Mr. Hardy wanted to go into closed session so that there wasn't, there's court
exposure.
Exposure for
it. Yeah, it make sense, Joe.
It's because we want to be seen. It's a little bit this. It's a little bit of this. It's what was the old expression about Washington, D.C.? It's Hollywood for ugly people. I think we saw that on display during January 6th when it was like daytime television for not so great looking people. It's I'm doing something when I have nothing to do. And that's really what we were talking about with the development of this bureaucracy, and these bureaucracies full of 6-figure employees. Never mind the 6-figure employee that's going to work at Grumman or Amazon. It's the 6-figure employee that works as the subdirector of the vice directorate in the Environmental Protection Agency, who just make sure that the form that some farmer filled out to swear that his farm doesn't impede any navigable waterways rubber stamps the form and sends it on, or sits there and says, gee, I wonder if this guy could have a license to broadcast his radio station. It's and on the radio show, I'm going to get you in all kinds of trouble with this, but it all started after the Civil War. It all started with the premise that the centralized federal government had to rein in the out-of-control states. And was there one instance after the Civil War that started? No, but the tumor started growing then. And each year goes by, somebody says, well, I want this program because you let the other guy's program go. And congressional representatives and executive branch officers will say, he's got us, we let the other program go, so now we gotta let your program go. And every year it's another one, and every year it's another one. And they do nothing, they create nothing, they impede. This is why I was mentioning 60 years of the Great Society. Lyndon Johnson didn't invent this. This was just programs that he saw that, I mean, apocryphally, he said, you know, if we pass this, the beeps are going to vote for us for the next 200 years. They only made it 60 because I've seen the polling data and the black community isn't voting for them anymore because they realized they were lying to them. Because I'm not the white supremacist. It's these people in government who say, here, stay in the black community. They empowered the redlining. They've come up with new creative ways through zoning. Another great Neil Williamson piece about, you know, this passive, you know, redlining that we allow. You talk about gentrification to go on. You know, that's what's happened to this country. The joy that I get every morning when I get up is that all the parts of it that were good are still there. We've just piled all this other stuff on top of it, and I believe wholeheartedly we can get a lot of that off if we can get past the virtue signaling of Judah or the fear-mongering of, you're going to throw grandma off of her Medicare if you know, because we have grown so used to these government programs. But you were going to, and I'm kind of annoyed at you, more than I'm annoyed at you for leaving 1400 back 17 years ago.
For those that are just tuning in, he was my boss at one time.
You, sir, I waggle my finger at you, were going to run for Scottsville supervisor.
I was.
And Philip Hamilton, I think Philip's been on the show.
Board of Supervisors, Philip Hamilton has.
Philip Hamilton, in his race against Creed Eads, look it up, carried the Scottsville Magisterial District of Albemarle County. Whole thing, all the way from Glenmore on down to Scottsville, Valley Street to Richmond Road.
I live in Glenmore.
You could have won that.
I could have won that.
Because
I know that.
There were plenty of Republicans coming out. If Philip Hamilton won that district.
There's 3 voting blocks, Mill Creek, Scottsville, and Glenmore. The political science would suggest if I carry my neighborhood, which I thought I could, and Scottsville, which leans to my ideology, and don't get hammered at Mill Creek, I'd be on the dais right now for supervisors.
But if Philip Hamilton, who is still learning the trade, could have carried Scottsville, and I love Philip dearly.
A bit polarizing, Mr. Hamilton.
Right, but somebody
watching the program,
and I'm picking on Jerry unfairly,
yeah.
But somebody running as a conservative voice on the Albemarle Board of Supervisors.
I would characterize my voice, the voice of common sense.
Fine.
Yeah, a centered voice.
Donna Price has been commenting on a lot of my posts. It's not like Donna isn't
She watches the show.
You could have been, or somebody of your ilk could have been that supervisory voice saying, hang on a second here. Are we really helping anyone?
I think about this often, Joe. Here, and I've told this story before on the show. If it was not for our youngest boy, who is 16 months old, the first 8 months of his life did not sleep a single night. And you know this. Yeah. You have 4 kids?
3.
3 kids. 8 months of no sleep.
My wife has 4 kids.
8 months of no sleep prevented that. And I'm not saying it would never happen again, but at that time, it was not good for the family unit.
I'm
family
just saying,
unit.
What's the old expression? Decisions are made by the people who show up.
That's true.
And in this book I'm writing, I've just finished the chapter where I'm laying down it's the 50% of the 30% that are. This is the tyranny of the minority that we're living under. The most publicized local election in 10 years, easy to say, Meg Bryce.
The school board election,
School board
Allison
at large.
Spillman against Dr.
Allison,
Meg Bryce.
Right. National news coverage. Sean Hannity talking about it.
I would say the most talked about school board race, maybe in American history. Do we want to go that far?
50% voter turnout. The answer is not saying, well, Joe, Allison beat Meg by 20 points.
Hammered her.
But what about the other 50% of the voters? See, everyone says, Albemarle is, I'm sorry.
That's okay. That doesn't have to be on there. It's just a mag. Branding. Screw that branding.
Do I have one that says pyramid painting? Paving? Everyone says Charlottesville is blue, Albemarle is blue, Virginia is blue. I won't believe that. And I don't care. I get treated worse by the Republican Party than I do the Democratic Party. Mark Warner is nicer to me than a lot of the Senate candidates that want to run against Tim Kaine. I got kicked out of hotels by the RPV during the 2016 convention. The Democrats love me. I don't know, whatever that means gravitas-wise. But I'm not saying this about a political party. I am saying that if we allow 15% of our population to determine who's passing higher taxes, who's regulating more business, then we can't be surprised when they virtue signal, because the math works out. You can fool some of the people all of the time and all of the people some of the time, but you can't. But when you get that number down to 12%, it becomes a lot easier to fool 12% of the people into thinking, yeah, I'm going to vote for this person because they're for higher wages. Well, I'm for higher wages too. What are you making that earns you higher wages? Those are the things that I think are a lot less about politics. In the chapter I just finished, I was talking about the property rights election back in 2012. So 2012 comes and we have a constitutional amendment on the ballot to codify protections that the Supreme Court said, you better fix this, in their Kelo decision. Clarence Thomas's dissent said, you better fix this. So we finally, and we don't just fix it with a law, we fix it with a constitutional amendment. Mark Obenshain of the Valley and Rob Bell put together this constitutional amendment. It gets all the way, now it's at the ballot box. November of 2012. Remember what else was going on in November of 2012? There was a little presidential election going on. I was volunteering for the people who were supporting the property rights constitutional amendment. There was another table manned by a political party that President Obama was a member of that was actively campaigning against the property rights constitutional amendment. Yet, in the city of Charlottesville, blue Charlottesville, 65% of the residents voted for the constitutional amendment, despite, I didn't break out the numbers, President Obama carried Virginia 51-47, and the constitutional amendment carried Virginia 75-25. Core principles of liberty, freedom, property ownership, individuality, privacy, free speech. These are all things, and this is part of the reason RFK Jr. has got, anywhere between 11 to 20% in some polls, because people are starting to feel like these two political parties are like, the NWO versus Hulkamania in wrestling. It's like they're yelling at each other, but they're really just dancing around the ring with each other and then going out for dinner afterwards. Let us do our thing. Stop pretending you're the answer. Lloyd, anyone who holds elected office, stop peeing on our legs and telling us it's raining. It's not working. 60 years. The last poll that came out earlier this week, Joe Biden is only getting support from 60% of the black community. That was 95% 3 years ago. 30% of the black community has said, hold it. What's going on here? 51% of the Latin American, the Latino community, supports other people besides Joe Biden. I won't say the name unless I might burst into flames. Trump. people are realizing that, as Reagan said all those years ago, I'm from the government and I'm here to help is the problem. It's not that Sam Sanders isn't a good guy, or Jesse Rutherford, or Chris Fairchild. He posted a question on Facebook about the Fluvanna Leadership Program.
Chris Fairchild, supervisor of Fluvanna Counties, come on the program.
He said,
huge Chris Fairchild fan right here, me.
He said, should we be giving $1,000 to the Fluvanna Leadership Fund? Or I can imagine it's some sort of group that tries to teach young Fluvanians leadership. And I said, no, that's what the Chamber of Commerce is for. That's what the business leaders of the area, if they want to empower their workforce, the Charlottesville Regional Chamber of Commerce has their Leadership Charlottesville program. The Virginia Association of Broadcasters has a leadership program. You don't need the government to do these things. Because he said, otherwise, how do we tell the Little League we can't give them $1,000, or the Kiwanis Club, or the Ruritans? That's the rabbit hole. And instead of saying, no, we shouldn't give it to the Fluvanna Leadership Fund, they say, all right, why don't we raise taxes and give it to the Little League and the Rotarians, and that's always the answer. Is we'll just go find the money somewhere else. There I am, I'm monologuing again. I'm sorry, Tracy.
No.
This is what happens a week without a radio show, and you say, "Come talk."
You're not modeling. You're not. We're listening and we're agreeing. This is a perfect way to close the program. 2 hours and 22 minutes.
Brought to you by Pyramid Paving.
2 hours and 2 minutes without stopping here on the program with the award-winning broadcaster Joe Thomas.
WTON in Waynesboro, Stanton.
We'll be tuning in. We're basically being told by government in a group of 5 people in Charlottesville, a group of 6 people in Albemarle.
No. It's worse than that. So this came out. Senator Mike Lee said that there's a group in Washington called The Firm, with apologies to Mr. Grisham.
Yeah.
They are Messrs. Jeffries, Johnson, Schumer, and McConnell. They write all the legislation. Add President Biden. That means not just here in Charlottesville, the nation is being governed by 5 people. Think about that.
And think about this. When folks that are in positions of power tell us, we're going to raise your taxes.
They shouldn't be in power first.
Basically, they're saying to us, we know how to spend your money better than you know how to spend your money. And when they say to us, we're going to raise the taxes to help you in the end, you need to hold them accountable. And I guess
that's where you're going to get it, is in the end.
I guess how we hold them accountable is in the voting booth. Unfortunately, that's not happening around here.
Well, but it's also about running.
Well,
it's not letting them choose who the candidates are and just say, here's the red candidate, here's the blue. It's Kellen Squire.
Yeah, here's the problem is, and it's a much worse problem than we want to truly realize. And it's not just an unwillingness to run, or it's not just a forgetfulness of voting on election day. I think what's happened, it's apathy.
Well, because after a while
of losing so much that it's not even disinterest, but it's like a state of mind where like we have no chance. And that's way worse than forgetfulness or disinterest. It's literally telling yourself, I have no reason to do this because I have no chance.
It's the ultimate form of societal gaslighting, because like in an abusive relationship, one of the spouses comes home and tells the other, you're never going to make anything without me. You need me. And I'm keeping this gender neutral because I think it does happen both sides. But that's the ultimate gaslit relationship we're in with the government. We married them, and now they're telling us we can't amount to anything if we didn't have them. And I'm not saying I want anarchy, but they don't need to be telling us we can't survive without them. They can go back to, making sure that nobody's downloading my emails by hacking into my computer. How about that? How about you go back to making sure that I really won't even say make the trains run on time, because I don't ever necessarily think that that's their job either. Make sure the roads are paved. Make sure the police officers have, body armor and are on the street.
I just want government to be boring and in the background
Yeah.
and consistent and predictable.
Thank you.
That's all I want.
Yeah, that's why he should have been the Scottsville supervisor.
Literally all I want. Joe Thomas, we'll close on this. Take a couple of minutes for the many folks
Another
watching.
couple of minutes. Oh my God!
For the many that are watching here, Christina Nichols-Sandridge says, shout out to the Virginia Association of Broadcasters Leadership Program, which Joe is a graduate of.
First ever graduating class, 2011.
You got a lot of folks watching. Georgia Gilmer says she absolutely loves this show. I've enjoyed it very much as well. Highlight how we can hear you, listen to you, connect with you, the timeline of when that could happen.
So we're just 7 days into what could be at minimum a 45-day window waiting for FCC approval. I was hoping maybe we could do a business jargon, local marketing agreement where we could run the place before we own the place. That may not happen. So we're going to start web streaming on Monday morning just for a couple hours, just like what Jerry's doing. Yeah, you'll have to see me because I have cameras. But we'll do YouTube, Rumble. I've got to go home. I've got new technology waiting for me. It arrived from FedEx literally as I was walking out the door to come here. I'm going to get that all set up so that we can be together again. So I don't have to come here and eat up 2.5 hours of Jerry's show.
Boy, no, go ahead. We've enjoyed it.
And then, Mac's going to be on there. We'll invite some guests to come on and talk about, the week that was, because there's been a lot of stuff happening. So go to my Facebook page at Seville Joe Thomas, and there'll be announcements as to where the links are for the YouTube and Rumble. And then somewhere 39 to, 60 days from now, 39 to 53 days from now, we'll get the approval to transfer the license and we'll start broadcasting. And it'll be 101.1 FM in Albemarle County and Nelson and down through Scottsville, just Western. Who knows? I'm still knocking on doors. I haven't started a letter writing campaign yet about a Charlottesville signal, but I understand that they're very effective. And then it's 1240 in Stanton. And that's a great signal, too, because actually I was listening to 101.1 one day, and I popped over to the AM in Midpoint, Crozet, Ivy, and I was still getting 1240. So it's a pretty good signal. Gets all the way to the West Virginia line, and then 98.9 in Harrisonburg. So we appreciate it. I hate giving out my email. I chose it, and I laugh. I tell everyone, Mojo Radio 1075 at gmail.com if you want to reach out, or just go to that Facebook page. You can, send me a link or whatever you like to do there. It's such a great feeling to know that you're all ready to kind of continue on this Chaucerian journey with us. And again, Fighting Colors in Ruckersville, the shirt, but also logo design and nose art, and not like piercings, but like the old B-52s. Can I mention Have I mentioned Pyramid Paving?
Can.
Okay.
Pyramid Paving. You get the viewers and listeners mentioning Pyramid Paving as well. Joe Thomas, this has been a pleasure. 2 hours and 10 minutes.
Is that a record? Have we set a record?
We actually did an 8-hour telethon straight, where for 8 hours I was sitting in your chair. I did not get out of that chair. We raised $97,000
awesome.
for nonprofit. It was the Land Trust, and I did not get out of that chair for 8 hours straight.
Is that what I smell?
Yeah.
No?
Joe.
I have essential oils if you need.
Thank you, Joe. We cannot wait to hear and see Joe Thomas, guys, back on air. In a media desert that we call Central Virginia and the Shenandoah Valley, Joe Thomas is a beam of purity and truth and honesty and accountability and at times fearlessness. And that is a mindset that is lacking in our region. We need voices from both sides of the aisle to hold everyone accountable and to offer perspective that we all can learn from. You don't have to agree with us, but having the voice out there is how we all grow as people with our mindsets. So for Joe Thomas and Judah Wickower, my name is Jerry Miller.
Oh, I got to say it, Jerry.
Yes.
So long, and thanks for all the fish.
Absolutely. I knew you were going to get that in there. I knew that you was going to get that in there. Thank you kindly for joining us on a program that you can find anywhere on social media and wherever you get your podcasting content. So long, everybody. Joe, that was awesome. That was absolutely awesome.